Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we'll discuss the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In page 1, we have news related to the survey. Let's go through it. The survey expects the GDP growth to be around 9.2% in this fiscal year and to stable down to 8 to 8.5% in 2022-23. But this estimate comes with certain assumptions and caveats. And what are those? Those are the monsoon has to be normal, the global withdrawal of liquidity by all the central banks, the tapering that we discussed in the previous news hours, that will go down in an orderly fashion, and the oil prices will stable down to 70 to 75 per barrel, and the global supply chain disruptions would ease over slowly during the course of period. Only when all these assumptions hold true, the expected growth could be achieved, or else the growth would be distorted. And the article says that nowhere in the survey there is a mention of shape of recovery, because the previous economic survey expected the Indian economy to grow at a V shape. Because during the first lockdown, the growth of the economy fell, then it increased, and again due to the COVID pandemic, the growth reduced a bit, and slowly it has increased again. So now the growth has been kind of a W-shaped recovery. And even now we have an Omicron stage, so we can't really expect in what type of the alphabet the growth would be. So we'll just have to wait and watch. And the specialty of this survey is it went for an agile approach, meaning instead of predicting what the growth rates would be and what the estimates would be and taking a stance, the government went for the provisions as and when it was required. It used to take back feedback from the economy based on the numbers that it was receiving from the economy, and it used to take steps to achieve that. This is called agile approach, being open to change and adapting to change as it comes. And we'll look into the details of the survey in the survey page that we have. Now let's proceed. In the editorial page, we have an article related to Air India, turbulence ahead. In the previous news hours, we discussed about the Air India going back to the Tatas and how the Tatas have re-enrolled for the Employment Provident Fund organization for all their employees, etc. This article lists out the challenges that the Tatas have to face, because the domestic air passenger segment shows that only those budget and low cost flights are holding the dominant position now. And these budget airlines hold almost 4/5 of the market. And Tata already has a Vistara airline, which it got into business through a joint venture from the Singapore Airlines. And even the Vistara has struggled to establish a market share in the. So what the Tatas have to do now? Probably the Tatas will merge the low cost airline of Air India's AirAsia and the Vistara, or they have to use their managerial capacity in the Tata Administrative Services to cope up with this challenge. So this article basically talks about the challenge for the Tatas in the domestic budget and low cost segment and how to overcome the losses that the Air India has been making. And in open editorial page, we have an article related to economy talking about the employment numbers. This article is important from prelims point of view because it has various factual data related to employment and labor force surveys that could be used as a statement question in prelims. Let's go into the details of it. See, in any economy, the most important indicators that the economy is transiting structurally, that is, it is moving from agriculture to the business or from business to service sector, those are the growth of rate, growth rate and the change in the composition of the workforce. So if we look at the rate at which the certain sector is growing and how much of the workforce is there in that sector, we'll know what type of economy is that. If the majority are people are in the agriculture sector, we say that sector is an agriculture sector. If the majority of people are there in the service sector, we say that is a service oriented sector. And the article talks that when it comes to growth rates, we have data and fairly we are increasing the growth rate after the 1991 reforms. But when it comes to employment data, unemployment data, we don't have data, and that is the main problem to predict anything. And the trend in unemployment has not shown any pattern, because some years it might increase, some years it has decreased due to various factors. The article says that the growth of economy measured by GVA at constant prices constantly increased from the last 20 years. But the same is not happening with the employment pattern, because there are wide variations and different experts drew different conclusions because of various reasons. And what are those reasons? They can be economical reasons, sociological reasons, and technological reasons. And also gap in the data, because the employment data is not readily available with the government to predict properly. And whatever the data that is available, we look at into it what are the problems with the data that is available. And the main two sources for the data are the National Sample Survey Office's surveys and the census data. And we know that the last census took place in 2011. So even in 2021, we are relying on 10-year-old data. And the NSSO survey, they take place every 5 years. So the data which we are relying is 5 years old, and the other data that we are relying on is 10 years old. So how can we predict accurately if we are relying on such old data? And from the last 3 years, we shifted to the periodic labor force survey, which collects the data every year on an annual basis. But the problem is we only have the periodic labor force survey for the last 3 years. So now, even though we have the NSSO data and the labor force data, we can't compare these both, because these both are from different periods. So we can't have any meaningful conclusions comparing these two data. Then the authors go into the details of the periodic labor force data. They say that the employment has increased at a faster rate than the growth in the population. So it's a good thing. The employment is increasing much more than the growth in population. But in spite of that, we have high unemployment rates, because the number of people who want employment is increasing. That is, the labor force is increasing. So in spite of the employment increasing at a much faster rate than the increase in population, because of increase in the labor force, the unemployment rates are still high. And they also show that the female participation rate increased from 17% to 24% in 1920. And the gap between male and female worker participation rate is reducing. Out of every 100 workers, for every 100 workers, there are around 32 female workers now, which is a good thing. It shows that more and more women are coming into the workforce. And the unemployment rate of the female labor force in rural areas is lower than the male workforce. This is an important bit for prelims. In rural areas, more number of men are unemployed compared to the women, and they say that probably this is because there is less gender discrimination in the informal jobs that happen in rural areas, and in the formal sector in urban areas, more men are employed compared to the women. And if you look at the sectoral composition of the workforce, even now around 45% of the workforce are engaged in agriculture, 30% of the workforce in service sector, and around 23% in industry sector. This shows that the labor shift, the transformation from an agriculture sector to industry sector that we want is not happening, because even now around 45% of the labor is employed just in the agriculture sector. And between 2019-2020 and 2017-18, around 56 million new jobs were created. But out of the new jobs created, around 60% went to the agriculture. So what does this show? First of all, too many people are employed in agriculture, and out of the new jobs created, again people are going back to agriculture. 57% of the new jobs are going back to agriculture. Agriculture sector, which is already crowded with too many people, there is lots of disguised unemployment in agriculture, because of which the productivity and profitability of the agriculture sector is low. And if you add more labor force to it, it only leads to more unemployment, less income, more inefficiency, and low productivity in the agriculture sector, which is bad for the country. So we discussed that majority of the new entrants are going into the agriculture sector. And why the manufacturing sector is not able to take in the absorb the unskilled workforce? Because lot of the manufacturing units are going for capital intensive, labor displacing technologies. They are going for mechanization of production. That's why they are not able to absorb the unskilled labor force. And now with the rising artificial intelligence and internet of things, further the unskilled labor force absorption into the manufacturer sector is further going to come down in the future. And this problem of raising income of the manufacturing and service sector without absorbing the labor force is a unique one. And this raises questions on the basic economic theories that we follow when we say we are following the economic policies. And what is that theory here? The Arthur Levis model. So we need to understand what is this Arthur Levis model. This Arthur Levis model says that there are too many people who are employed in the agricultural sector, and there is lots of inefficiency in this sector. And because the manufacturing sector is increasing, when the manufacturing sector increases, the wages in the manufacturing sector that the employees get will be more than the agricultural sector. So people move from agricultural sector to manufacturing sector, thus reducing the stress on this agricultural sector, at the same time absorbing more and more people to the manufacturing sector, showing that the sector of the economy has transformed from agriculture to manufacturing sector, showing that the country is developing. This is the Arthur Levis model. I'll repeat again. Arthur Levis model shows that the additional labor force in agriculture would be absorbed by the manufacturing sector by providing higher wages, thus transforming the economy from an agrarian economy into a manufacturing economy. But the authors are saying that this model is not working, because the incomes of the manufacturing sector is growing without increasing more number of people. The increasing people to the manufacturing sector is not happening. So probably instead of focusing on this model of development, we should try to focus on agriculture itself. We should rethink our strategy, saying that we need to develop a relevant agri-centric model for economic transformation to make our agriculture more remunerative, to make it more attractive by following policies in agriculture sector and allied sectors. So we need to focus on the allied sector of the economy, then promoting production linked incentive schemes for the food processing economy, and so on. That's about this article. And these graphs here, they show about the price fluctuations in the top crops. What are top crops? Tomato, onion, and potato. These three crops have the most variations of prices in the Indian economy. And why do this happen? This happened because of unseasonal rains, prolonged drought. So that leads to supply distortions. There won't be enough supply in the market for certain months. Suddenly it will lead to a price increase. Again, when the rains come, when the production happens, again when the supply of the top crops comes into the market, the prices stabilize. So because to control the fluctuations in these top crops, which are also staple diets, the government has come up with Operation Greens. This article is about the criticism of economic survey. The opposition has said that the survey only paints a rosy picture of the economy. They have not focused on the number of people who have gone out of jobs during the COVID. Around 84% of the households suffered a loss of income during the COVID, and around 4.6 crore of population have been pushed into extreme poverty. At the same time, India is also ranking 104 out of 116 countries in the global hunger index. So the opposition has said that the economic survey has not focused on these main issues. In news page, we do not have anything related to economy. Let's go to page 10. This is important. Fortified rice supply in government schools raised. Rice fortification is an important topic for prelims and mains this year. What is fortification of nutrition? So when we add the nutrition to the rice granules so that we can reduce the malnutrition, that is called fortification of rice, because we are fortifying the required nutrients into the rice, staple rice. The economic survey says that the center has distributed around 4 lakh metric tons of fortified rice through Anganwadis and midday meal scheme to the government school. And why is this done? The center has the objective of fighting malnutrition through rice fortification. Critics also say that just fortifying rice won't be enough, because we have to go for diversification of the diet. Just by increasing the nutrients in the rice, it won't help the malnutrition. In fighting the malnutrition, we'll have to diversify our entire diet. Demand for MGNREGA work softens. This article discusses how during the second wave of COVID, the demand for MGNREGA work reduced. And it says we have to be cautious in considering the MGNREGA workforce in our various factoring surveys, because the demand for MGNREGA work is increasing in those states where the people are migrating into than the states from where the people are migrated. For example, people migrate from the states like Bihar, UP to states like Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Gujarat to work. And the demand for MGNREGA work is increasing in these states, the migrant recipient states like the Punjab, Maharashtra, Karnataka. And the demand also reduced because the funds that were going into this MGNREGA scheme during the second COVID reduced, because the government was investing the same amount in the healthcare sector. You don't need to go too much into the details of this article. Creating jobs via infra investments. The principal advisor has said that the government is increasing in the MGNREGA and other infrastructure projects, thus creating indirect contractual jobs. And there is nothing important in that article. Let's focus on this. Container shortage inflates shipping bills. During the COVID, because of the restrictions, the shipping reduced between countries because of various restrictions, and there was a problem in the containers. Because of the reduction in the production of containers and the containers struck in whichever ports they were in, there was huge demand for the containers and there was no supply for it. And because of this supply demand mismatch, the price of the containers increased. Thus, it also led to the increase of the freight. The freight sea rates almost increased from 300% to 350% rate. You can imagine the impact it will have on input cost. So this input in freight rate and the container shortage leads to an additional spending of around $14 billion on import transportation services. and this cost will have an impact on our economy, because when we import the raw materials, when the cost of the transportation included in this input cost is high, finally it will be called as importing the inflation, because of the high prices of the inputs, the final product of the price of the final product will also be high. Thus we are importing inflation because of the container shortage. This article briefly says that the economic cost of food grains has been increasing. The cost of the food grains that we provide under the National Food Security Act, the cost charged to the people are just 2 rupees and 3 rupees for wheat and rice. But the previous surveys discussed about the rising cost of economic bill, but this survey has nothing about that observation. It has just mentioned that the cost of wheat procurement is increasing. The government didn't have any data related to impact of COVID on learning, so it has used the ACER report of NGO Pratham. The annual status of education report released by NGO Pratham shows the trends about the education and the learning outcomes. And the report says that both the enrollment and learning have suffered during the lockdown. The number of children between the ages of 6 to 14 who are not enrolled into the schools doubled during the lockdown from 2.5% to 4.6%. And number of people who shifted from private school to government schools increased because of the financial distress that people faced during the COVID times, and the free facilities provided in the government schools, and because of the migration that is being happening to their villages. This article is important. This talks about ethanol blending of petrol. The sugar mills were in losses because of the sugar supply mismatch. And India is the largest consumer of the sugar, and it is also the second largest producer of sugar in the world. First largest producer is Brazil. So because of the program of ethanol blending of the government, which earlier had a target of 10%, now we have a target of 20%. That means in every 1 liter of petrol we have to blend 20% of ethanol in the petrol. So because of this, what happens, on one side, the additional sugar that the sugar mills have, the additional sugar cane that the sugar mills have, they sell it to the oil marketing companies in the form of ethanol production after the ethanol production. So by selling this ethanol, the sugar mills get revenue, so their profits increase. Thus the dues to the farmers are paid, so the incomes of the farmer increased. This is one benefit, wherein the sugar mills sell the ethanol to the oil marketing companies and they get their revenues and they pay back their dues to the farmers. The other benefit being the environmental benefit, wherein we are blending ethanol, a relatively safer fuel, in the petrol, so that will have environmental benefit. And third being, because we are blending ethanol with petrol, to that extent the imports of petrol would reduce, so dependency on other countries would reduce, and also the cost of import in the balance of payments would, the cost of imports would reduce, and it will increase the balance of payment. This article talks about how vaccination not just played a role in the health sector but also in the economy, because as more and more people got vaccinated, now currently around 87% of the population aged between 18 and 14 are vaccinated, and 95% of people aged between 45 and 60 are vaccinated. Because of this number, many people are vaccinated, it increased in the confidence of the people in those sectors where there was human touch involved, and thus it started to opening up of those sectors thus leading to less number of supply chain distortions and upticking the growth in the economy, thus having a positive impact on the economy. So we can observe how a thing like vaccine, which has health impact, also has indirect economic impact. And lastly, in this page, this is about the growth of forest cover in India. The rate of forest growth in India is so much that India ranked third highest in the rate of forest growth in the net gain of forest. Now currently around 24% of the geographical area of India is covered with forest, which makes it 2% of world's area of forest cover. And what are the top 10 countries that account for the 66% of the world's forest cover? Those are Brazil, Peru, Congo and Russia being others. And the majority of forest cover increase in India it happened in the very dense category of the forest cover, and the next it happened in the open forest cover category. But there is also a criticism from the environmentalists saying that the methodology that we use to count the forest, the tree cover and the forest cover, that is not right and we are overcounting the forest cover. But the government says that the methodology that we use is consistent with the global definitions. In world page we do not have anything related to economy. January sees the second highest GST collection. So this is a good thing. GST collection is a economic indicator showing that the economy is doing well. And the government also gave a compensation of 18,000 crores to the states. Thus it leads to the increasing the cash flow of the state, so that the state governments now can use that to finance their social security schemes, thus increasing the money supply in the economy, which will lead to increase in the demand, increase in the investment, that's leading to a positive economic cycle. No need to read this news related to corporates. We just need to go through the headlines that the core sector of the economy is growing. In the December, all the aspects of the core sectors of the economy grew, except two sectors, the crude oil and steel, which fell slightly. Other than that, the cement, natural gas, everything grew in December 2021. We'll regularly keep getting data like this. You don't need to completely focus on the factual numbers of the data. We just need to have a general trend, whether it is rising or increasing. And if it is rising or increasing, what are the subsectors in which it is rising or increasing. This article says that in another 10 years, the capital expenditure in the railways is going to increase such that the railways are going to become the engine of national growth. Even during the pandemic, when the economic activity reduced, the railway freight and the number of passengers transported through railway, it increased compared to the pre-COVID era. Let's look at this article. Currently, we have the insolvency bankruptcy code to deal with the liquidity proceedings of those people who defaulted. But what about those firms which are there in multiple countries? The insolvency bankruptcy code can't do anything about it. So the survey has recommended that we should adopt the United Nations Commission on International Trade Laws bill. The United Nations Commission on International Trade Law cross-border insolvency provisions, which they got in 1997. It has been a widely accepted framework to deal with cross-border insolvency. So the survey, and previously even the Law Commission, had recommended that India should adopt this framework. Currently it has been adopted by around 49 countries such as the Singapore, the UK, the United States, South Africa and Korea, etc. And this law works on four main principles, that is access, recognition, cooperation and coordination. Access to the data and other things related to the defaulting firm, recognizing each other countries issue with the default of the firm, cooperating and coordinating with the proceedings. And no need to read this news and no need to read this chip crunch news because we already know about the chip crunch. We just need to read the headline that FDI in pharma increased. No need to read about Sun Pharma. No need to read the news about Bharti Airtel. No need to read news about this. Let's look at these both articles. This article says that because of the severe water stress that we are facing in areas where we have producing paddy and wheat and sugarcane, we need to go for crop diversification because crops like paddy, wheat and sugarcane, they consume lots of water. So for that reason we need to go for crop diversification and focus on pulses, etc. So this article says that the survey recommends that the MSP should be used to promote this policy of crop diversification. For example, how could MSP be used to achieve this? In case the government increases the MSP on those pulses or increases the pulses which are covered under MSP, then people would automatically plant more pulses compared to paddy, wheat and sugarcane. Thus, a policy like MSP can be used to nudge people to go for crop diversification. And the article says center can only change the rate of MSP and change the number of crops that are covered under MSP. Finally, the states have to do the implementation part. And they say that instead of directly giving subsidies to agriculture sector, we'll have to invest on agricultural research because every rupee spent on agricultural research will give better yield compared to the amount spent on subsidies and other direct benefit transfers. We already discussed in the previous page about the ethanol blending program of the government. The center has a target of 20% ethanol blending by 2025, and for the current year it had a target of 10%, and out of this 10% target we achieved a target of 8.1%. So what is the benefits of ethanol blending? It will reduce the country's import bill, it will boost the agricultural sector, it will reduce the environmental pollution, and we also discussed how because of the ethanol blending the revenues of the sugar companies increased and they paid back their dues to the farmers. So one policy like ethanol blending have so many rollover effects on different sectors of the economy. The government also had notified previously the E12 standards and E15 standards. What are E12 and E15? E12 means ethanol 12%. That means ethanol has to be blended 12% with petrol. And E15 means 50% blending of ethanol to enable the automobile industry to manufacture E12 and E15 compliant motor vehicles. We can skip the sports page. And in text and context, we do not have anything related to economy. And those are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.